Hello, coming at you with a short film review. I watched Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe, and I just want to give my review of it and what I thought. It came out this year. It was released on Paramount Plus. That's where I watched it, and I loved it. I thought it was great. So overall, like first impressions, I thought it was dumb. That's what I thought was the best thing about it. It's super simple, but doesn't indulge in just being completely mindless. It's plays the characters of Beavis and Butthead through and through, and they understand what they are, and they don't do anything that's outside of that. There's no real sort of like statement that they're trying to make with the series. It's just a Beavis and Butthead adventure, and that's what it is. It's great in that regard. I think also the humor doesn't exclude it. I think it's pretty ubiquitous or just universal. I don't think it delves too far into like the boy humor or gross out humor. It's there, but they're doing kind of, there's a lot of things that latch onto. If you don't like this, there's this. If you don't like this, there's this. And that's one of its strengths. I think that it's overall something that everybody can appreciate. Kind of like a family thing. Definitely like a PG-13 type movie set for its target audience are teenagers, but I think also adults can appreciate it too. I don't think that you have to read up on anything or understand the whole history of Beavis and Butthead to appreciate it, and that's what makes it so enjoyable. I think also it doesn't overstay its welcome. The movie's about an hour and a half long, and once it hits its final point, that's it. That's its conclusion. Wraps it up, and you're done. It's something that's wholly entertaining and doesn't linger. Keeps you wanting, for me at least, wanting a little bit more, and that's what makes it, a good movie. You want more of it. You want to see more of it, and that's part of the enjoyment of that. I think also the dialogue is supernatural, and not natural in like a Quentin Tarantino just like endless flow of words type deal where every character has something to say and it's super quick and they're witty and snappy. They feel like people plucked out of our world and put into this silly situation, and that's one of the strengths of the movie. I think that it's something you're going to meet these people and you're going to run into them, and you understand because their motivations are very clear that they're not too smart for their own good. Especially like Beavis and Butthead, like themselves, like Beavis and Butthead. They're distinct in their own regards. They have their own goals, but they're not something that is overly... they're not making fun of themselves or making fun of the production. They are characters in this world. When it gets to exposition dialogue, they are it doesn't drag. It really is just like, okay, you need to do this, you need to do this. It's that classic comedy movie setup of there's a storyline, but that's not what you're here for. You're here for the jokes. It's just something to guide along their adventure or like their clumsiness. So overall, dialogue's great. The doesn't overstay its welcome. The humor isn't just for, teenage boys. I think it appeals to everybody, and it's dumb, which is why it's great. The story a little bit more in depth. I think to get to the meat and potatoes, that setup is just a hair too long or a little bit too complex for what it should be. I think they could have refined that down just a little bit. I know this is kind of a nitpick, but to get really into the bulk of the movie. Essentially, the movie is like 5 episodes condensed into a half or an hour and a half episode. It's to get into those scenarios, the setup. I just kind of wish it moved a little bit quicker. It's like, I get what you're trying to do. Just go on. I think also the other nitpick that I had is that the fantasy elements of it are a little bit too ridiculous. I think that what makes Beavis and Butthead great, I think also with King of the Hill, one of the reasons why I love that and I think it's really strong as a cartoon, like in Do America, there's a scene where Beavis and Butthead are in a trunk of a car and it's going down the freeway at 80 miles per hour, and they jump out of it and they're rolling down the freeway at 80 miles per hour. They're rolling and tumbling 4 miles down. They cause this huge accident pile up where cars are blowing up and catching on fire. There's like a semi truck that overturns, and then they like stand up, brush off their shoulders, and just like that was cool. That's part of its humor. But I think in this, at least in the beginning, it gets a little too on the fantastic side, something that isn't within the realm of our world. And I think that kind of undermines part of its humor, but it's not always that. And at the end, it kind of comes back, that fantastic element, that sort of sci-fi element. And it is funny. I just kind of wish they toned that down, and I wish that it was like in Do America, where it's this ridiculous situation where like the government is involved and they're hunting down, and there's like international terrorism with like Bruce Willis and all that kind of stuff. I kind of wish it was that level of ridiculous and didn't go into like the sci-fi fantasy world. But once again, that's a nitpick, and I think that's something, if I do watch the TV series, I think that it might not go that way, but I guess we'll see. Overall, though, the story is really good. I think that the narrative is structured in a way, it reminds me a lot of like Airplane or like the Classer Zucker movies, where the story is just there in service for the jokes. And the part of the meta elements aren't obnoxious or overbearing. When I think of meta humor, I think this is like something that's sort of populated or become popular in the last several years, where through The Office, where we're making fun of the fact that we're a TV show talking about real world things is, I think, a little overdone. They kind of do that, but they do it in a way that's in the Beavis and Butthead Do the universe, where it's in the background and also isn't like insulting the audience member. It isn't like, why are you laughing, how stupid this is. It's just like at the end of the movie, they reach their plot point and then they're just kind of like, whatever. You know, it's just, okay, we got here, we've met our goal, great, whatever. And that's part of the meta element that I appreciate. I think that's kind of a breath of fresh air in terms of just like referencing what you are and what you're doing, but not going overboard. That's also watched Only Murderers in the Building, and they kind of do that, where they're in their second season of the podcast, but it's also the second season of the show. So we're going to make jokes about the second season, and it's like, haha, you know, nudge, nudge, you're watching a TV program. It's not quite like that, but it's there, and I appreciate that. The other thing, too, is that they poke fun at their own lore. They have backstories. They kind of like allude to it, and then they totally like yank that rug from underneath you as a joke. There's a backstory element to Beavis's character and Beavis's mom, and they try to explain it, but as a character is explaining like Beavis's mom's story and the house that they're living in, they're shoving things into a sink disposal, and it's drowning out the person saying those things. So then they're just like, you're not hearing these things because it's not important and it doesn't really matter to the overall story. And it's also funny that they're making fun of that. It's kind of like an anti Rick and Morty thing, where I feel like Rick and Morty now is just its backstory. It's just like, okay, the characters are now like the main focus. That B plot line is now the A plot line, and now every reference has to have a story arc or a story conclusion, like a narrative conclusion, and they are kind of poking fun at those elements. The other thing is that I think that the scenarios that they set up are pretty creative. They go through and stumble through kind of Inspector Clouseau type deals where they're doing something really stupid, they get in trouble for it, and the way that they solve it is just still being equally dumb. And then people around them either realize how dumb they are, or also just kind of fall for the, wow, these people are super geniuses. I've never, I had this epiphany. And that's kind of like a old school TV thing, like Inspector Clouseau, like the Pink Panther. The creativeness of each scenario that they get into is very, very entertaining. And once you get over that, initial like 20 or 30 minute hurdle, it's just, you're just going to be glued to the screen. You're going to be paying attention to like, okay, they do this that's super stupid, and then they do this that's super stupid and dumb, and then they get into this situation, and this is how they get out of it. And that's part of, at least in the story-wise, what I find really, really funny. The last bit is that there's a very fine attention to detail. There's characters in the background that aren't drawn to, but they have their own little like bits and pieces that follow through and have their own conclusions. So it rewards you for paying attention to the things in the background that are pretty silly. That's kind of what makes me think that this is a little bit more intelligently made than it was back in the 90s. It seems like the group of people that made this stuff loved it. I know that Mike Judge was a part of the production, both producing it, writing it, and then of course voicing it. And it shows like, hey, audience member, I know we're talking about, we're making something really dumb, but because you're smart and you're paying attention, here are these other things. Those are just like those nice little details, and the specifically backgrounds, like I mentioned. I think also in the story, it's not overly lampooning anything. It's not like making a statement. It's just finding the humor in real world situations, and then also having characters realize like how dumb they are, or like reconciling how stupid they are. It's a little bit of that fish out of water type thing, but it turns it on its head, where Beavis and Butthead just equally are clueless, but then people realize like, oh no, they really are this dumb, or okay, why are they acting this way? That's part of the last aspect of the storytelling. In terms of the animation production, or like the filmmaking production, I love it. I think it looks great. One of the things that I really appreciate is that they still went with the limited style of animation, but also increase the overall production. So it looks slicker. It looks a little bit more better animated, but it isn't like a primal, where the animation and the movement is super majestic, and they're individually drawing every other frame. It's not animated on twos. They're still doing like that sort of like tweened instances and stiff, like, when a character talks, their body will stay still, and then they animate just the head. And it's great. It's, like I said, reminiscent of the classic 90s Beavis and Butthead, where they would send the animation to Korea, but also the production's increased. It looks a lot better, and I don't find it distracting. I think it actually adds to it. It kind of adds to the grounded nature of the characters and the scenarios that they're getting into. It's also kind of like that's how like King of the Hill is too, where those characters they're realistic characters that are animated, and that's kind of like it adds to that charm. Titmouse did the animation to this. They did Metalocalypse and Motor City. I love Metalocalypse. That's still one of my favorite series ever made. I think it's hilarious. And Motor City, I could see, Beavis and Butthead being animated that way, where it's just, Disney-esque type, super smooth ease-ins and super expressive breakdowns, and where they're animating on twos, so every other frame is individually drawn like it is in Motor City. That just looks so fantastic. But I think that would have undermined the simplistic nature of like what they're doing. Like I think it would have just like taken that punch away with just like how genuinely funny things are. And that's what I appreciate about it. The other aspect that I appreciate too, it's animated digitally. Well, I guess like it is in Motor City and Metalocalypse, but it's like Primal. One of the visual aspects that I appreciate a lot that I can see is just how it's drawn directly into the computer. It feels like they're drawing, like it looks like they're drawing on Cintiqs, and I think that adds to it. I think that it harkens to those old 90s cartoons, like the hair shifts a little bit when they're talking, but it's also, I love, like in Primal, they'll draw with a brush stroke, and that it's just like that thick black line where it's an inch, that ink, it looks like they're doing a pen drawing, but it's just like pure black in color. And I love that like contrast, and I love like that look. I like how animation studios now are embracing the digital aspect of their animation or their art style. The characters also look very grounded. It looks like they're drawing directly from reference, like they're almost tracing pictures of people's faces, and it almost looks ugly. I don't want to say that it looks ugly, because like the backgrounds are wonderfully painted. They're digitally painted and they look great, and the characters look amazing. But once again, it's like that Metalocalypse. It's super stiff. The characters look really grounded, but they allow them to be exaggerated. It looks like there's some level of interpretation with what they're rendering, and that's like the other part of it too. So anywho, I highly recommend this movie. I think it's very funny. I think if you're somebody like me who grew up in the 90s watching Beavis and Butthead on VHS, I'm going to show my dad this movie, and I know he's going to like it as much as I do, because we love Beavis and Butthead. And I hope to watch the TV series, because if this is, what it's going to be like, I have very high hopes. I'm very hesitant towards reamping things and redoing things. I think, one of the reasons why I kind of got late into watching this, I'm like, no, just do something different. Do something that's equally creative and find your own voice. But I think they're funny in their own regard. I think Beavis and Butthead, it's still creative in what they're doing, and it's hilarious. It has that same sort of creative energy, which was a pleasant surprise. So, cheers to Mike Judge for keeping the ball rolling, and I hope to watch the TV series. So, peace out, and have a good one.